Yeah. So actually, when I was when we're doing this last week, yeah, it's like, here's the news from a different angle. He says, so when we were going over the story of Gideon, which we're not done with, by the way, but we've certainly done enough of it. And we made mention of the story of Avraham and Terach and the idols, etc. And Shelley wrote me a note after class, and then that jogged my memory. And I remember it now. I remember where it was, that there was a wonderful article, and I'm going to share it with you today. It's worth looking through. A wonderful article by a great Tanakh teacher, a good friend, Rabbi Nati Helfgott. So it first appeared. What you have is what appears in tradition, and it says here, I think, oh yeah, it's taken from his forthcoming volume, Mikra and Meaning: Essays on Bible and its Interpretation, which is also in Hebrew. This is an excellent, if you're into Parshanut, this is an excellent book. And he covers a lot of different topics in Tanakh, a lot in Bamidbar. But so I remember this years and years ago. This is published in 2011. So, and one of the things also you like to see is when you see an essay from a forthcoming volume, and then you see the actual volume and you compare and you see like, where were the edits made? So it's not identical. It's not exactly, I mean, the idea is the same, but some of the writings here. So this is, so here, I guess this bio here, he's the chair of departments of Bible at Avraham at Chovei Torah, Judaic Studies SAR High School, and he's recently appointed. So this is recently appointed. This is 2010. So it's now been 14 years that he's recently appointed as Netivot Shalom in Teaneck, which is like on the other side of Teaneck. Wherever you live in Teaneck, it's the other side of Teaneck. Whatever. But he's just a wonderful, wonderful teacher. But even more importantly, like a super mensch and a great colleague. So here, let's just dive right into it. And again, so I want to thank Shelley for jogging my memory and bring this, and she just walked in and said it's a great article, and it is. That's why when I read back and reread it, I'm like, yeah, we have to share it. This is so good. The intertextuality in stories of Tanakh. So the question is wait a minute, we have Gideon is told that he has to destroy his father's idols, and he brings a bunch of guys with him, and he do it at night, and the people want to do something to him, they want to punish him for this. And then so the father quickly was like, well, can't the idols fight for themselves? And then you're scratching your head like, sounds like familiar. Like, where does that? Yeah. Oh yeah. The story of Terach and Avraham. So let's look at, and so what's going to happen is you see similarities in story, but you also see similarities in text. That's the intertextuality. Everybody now talks about intersectionality. So we could throw that in the garbage. We just talk about intertextuality, which is extremely, extremely important in a lot of areas. So yes. And I can't smell anything, but Gaz, I can smell.
But there have been other days when I've seen it here.
Like
Not today. Like there is something in the.
Like I walked in and usually it goes away, but it's not.
Interesting. I should switch the cologne. Okay. Okay. So here, one of the most well-known and foundational rabbinic agadot about the youth of Avraham is the story of the smashing of the father's idols. It appears in a number of midrashic sources, which most famously in Bereshis Rabbah, reproduced here in translation. So here we go. Okay, here, let me Tina on. And actually, now I could share the screen. Now that I could share the screen because we have not yet. Here we go. Okay. So this up here and that's here. Okay, so Terach was an idolater. Once he went to a certain place, he left Avraham to sell his idols. And remember, it was idols.com, idols.net, idols.org, whatever you want to call it. My son was angry at me yesterday or 2 days ago, and he says, that's it. I got hurt at newjersey.com. And I want to, I was like, I'm glad you pay attention to billboards on Route 280. That's great. But yeah, anyway, I'm like, okay, good luck. So she brings a plate of fine flour and she says, here it is, offered as a sacrifice to the idol. So Avraham, he takes a hammer, he smashed all the idols. He placed the hammer in the hands of the largest idol. When the father comes back, he says, who did this? He says, no, a woman came and brought fine flour and told me to offer before them. I put it before them. And one idol said, I will eat first. The other one said, no, I will eat first. The biggest one amongst them arose, took a hammer and smashed the other ones. So this is a story that we're told in, in third grade and fourth grade and fifth grade, whatever it is. And then Terach says, why are you saying such foolish things to me? Do they have knowledge? Are they alive? So Avraham says, Should not your ears what your mouth is saying? Terach took him and turned the page and delivered him to Nimrod. At Nimrod's palace, Avraham was put in danger of losing his life, for the police miraculously saved from the fiery furnace. That's the story of Avraham being saved from the fiery furnace, the Kivshan Eish, which, by the way, it's more than just a story, because we say it in the davening, we say it in the slichos. We say, remember God, the one who delivered Abraham from the fiery furnace, and that you can look at stories of fiery furnace and people being saved from death, and the story of Moshe when he's almost killed, and Hanan, Mishal Bazari, like all these different types of stories. So we look at them together and we kind of like compare and contrast them. So yes, so the what's amazing though, and this is such a well-known story, is that it's only a midrash. Now, only a midrash. Okay, so there's a lot of different ways, and we could do a whole different course. And there have been volumes and volumes written on the nature of midrash. What is midrash? Or it's really midrash. We'll say medrash, but it's midrash. Is midrash meant to be taken literally or not? Now, the way we're raised, probably the way we're taught, we almost take it as, oh yeah, of course it happened. When we get older, a little bit more sophisticated, and we've seen a little bit more of the world. Yeah, okay, I don't want to say it, be say cynical. Yeah, we're like, yeah, I don't know. Like Rivka was 3 when she got married, and she lived off the rock, and so and there are many instances where clearly the Midrash is meant to be a teaching tool, and it's meant to give us an insight into something, as opposed to being a literal interpretation of what happened. Okay, but so yeah, and there are different modes of learning that, just like the different modes of learning how we study any of the characters in Tanakh. Okay, so but we accept it as such a given, but it shapes Avraham's career, but yet we don't know anything about it. So as I mentioned last week, the Ramban in Lech Lecha and End of Noach and Lech Lecha discusses why is it that we're not really told anything about Avraham. His life, we're introduced to him, he's 75 years old is when his career really starts as God's guy. And we don't hear anything, much before that. But here, where is they're filling the blanks. So this exciting and dramatic scene shapes and colors the perception of Avraham, our father, and all subsequent Jewish literature. At least Avraham being viewed as the great iconoclast in Jewish history. And yet, from the perspective of understanding the enterprise of the rabbis, the narrative is puzzling. This episode is entirely missing from the biblical text, both explicitly and implicitly. Where did they see any indication of this in Avraham's life? This is troubling, especially if we look in the text of Genesis. There's no discussion of ever confronting idolatry or having any confrontation surrounding idolatry or its philosophies. An initial discussion of this topic might raise the possibility that the rabbis of the Midrash were addressing 2 problems that raised philosophical and exegetical questions for them. One is the utter silence of the text about the prehistory, the hero of the narrative of Avraham. Again, as I said, we only were introduced to him. He's 75 years old. We're told in the beginning of Lech Lecha, he's 75 years old when he leaves Haran. As opposed to the other heroes of Tanakh, Moshe, Yosef, that we don't know anything about young Avraham. Right? So maybe they'll make a new series, like they had young Sheldon, so they have young Avraham. Oh my God, we just found the next big hit. Really, really good notes that he has here. Sometimes the best thing when you read these types of articles, the best parts of these articles are the notes, especially the very last note in the article, which actually we'll see. Okay, so we have we're left, it says, with a gaping chasm in understanding his development and his achievement of the status of father of our people. The assumption that the father of our nation must have not simply been a regular child, must have been imbued with unique and perceptive soul at an early age, was certainly one that fits well with the expectation of the origins of heroic figures such as Avraham. Right? Whenever we have any great person, there's always a character development. We want to know, where did they come from? What number were they in the family? How did they do in school? What do the teachers think about them? How are they raised? Right? Everybody always has these great stories. Okay. I was when we were in Vancouver a couple of weeks ago. So I'm sitting at the hockey game, because that's why we went to these cities, to go to a hockey game. Brilliant. And I could tell that and Vancouver, it was a Vancouver versus Edmonton in all Canada games. That's a very big deal. There was no national anthem for us. It was only all Canada, which I love. And I could tell that in front of me. I figured out right away. People with me did not right away, but I knew right away that this was a player's mom. It was a parent of one of the players, one of the opposing parent for Edmonton. So there's a player's name is Ryan Nugent Hopkins. He's one of the really good players in the league. And then I don't know, somehow we got into conversation, and she's like, I'm a mom. Like very Canadian. I'm a mom. I'm like, yeah. I'm like, oh, your son is. And so I know a lot about the player, so I was able to converse with her. And she told me the story personally, which I've heard so many times of so many professional hockey players, is that when they were in grade school, they don't say, they were grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. That's how they say it there, not first grade, second grade, third grade. When he was in grade 1, grade 2, or whatever it was, the teacher asked him, what do you want to do when you grow up? And he said, I want to be playing the NHL, be a professional hockey player, as every single kid in the class writes. And the teacher said, as they say to every single kid, yeah, maybe you want to pick a more practical dream. Maybe you want something that's a little bit more realistic because you're never going to get there, right? So I said to her, hard. I said, did you go back to the teacher? She's like, oh yeah. So that's a story of character development that you see a lot over time. But and we see it with Moshe. Moshe, he's in the basket and the thing, we're reading about it. He's young and he goes out and he sees his brothers and there's suffering in the world. He wants to do something about it. And Yosef has dreams and the brothers hate him. And Avraham, right? He's like a prefab product. So where does this come from? Okay, so that's what perhaps the Medrash is, we have the cart before the horse, so the Medrash wants to fill in the blanks for us, okay? This philosophical agenda may also be coupled with the theological problem and the seemingly unmotivated nature of God's choice of Avraham to lead the people. So what he's saying here is that it's just Hashem says to Avraham, we have no idea, why did he pick Avraham? It wasn't even Avraham, it was Avram. Why did he pick him? Why me? Who, what, me? Okay, so just think of that in terms of someone being picked out of nowhere by God or a messenger of God, as we see in our story as well. And all of a sudden, like, why? Okay. So he says, it's to this issue that I would like to turn. So here we go, our story in Judges 6, which we have just completed. And we're not nearly done with the story of Gideon, but it's very, very important to kind of put this together, put this in reference. So here it is, story in Judges 6. So now, when you're reading this article, usually we'd read this in sort of like a voracious mode. And then like Gideon 6, you're thinking like, yeah, I don't know what that is. But now that we're learning Gideon 6 and you see it, and you're like, yeah, now I know. Okay, earlier we indicated there's no hint of the smashing of the idols narrative in the entire Abraham cycle in the Torah. This is true. However, while the story does not appear in Genesis, it's clear that a similar story to this one does appear in the Bible. And here we have it, Gideon and the judge right here, okay? If you look at the bottom, by the way, Rav Yaakov Meidan and Rav Amnon Bazak have noted this parallel as well in some of their lectures. These are two of the giants in modern Persian today. Really, really something. Rav Meidan, actually, his son was very badly injured in the war, and it was like really touch and go. But he's home now, and I mean he lost his limb, so it was like a really tough go of it. So in the story of young Gideon's commission as a judge, here we go, 6:25 to 32. We're like, oh, we know this, yay. It's so great when they quote something and we know it. It's such a good feeling. Like you said, you sat in the Haftarah this week and like, yay, I know that. It describes a scene in which the angel of the Lord directs Gideon to destroy the altar his father had dedicated to the idolatrous god Baal and destroy the Asherah idol which was on top of it. Gideon is afraid of destroying the altar in broad daylight. He takes 10 loyal men under the cloak of darkness. He destroys it and the idols upon it. In the morning, everybody wakes up and they want to know who did this? Heinous act of deicide. Okay. Upon discovering that it was Gideon, they attempted to extract him from his father's house and put him to death. He's defended by his father, who mocks the idol on inheritance by stating, do you have to contend for the Baal? Do you have to vindicate him? If he's a god, let him fight his own battles, since it's his own altars that has been destroyed. Then he's named Yeruval, meaning let the Baal contend with him. The story contains a number of elements that clearly serve as a template for the Midrashic narrative, considering the early history of Avraham. So now, what's interesting is that, and he's going to touch on this, is that we look at a later story to inform us about an earlier story. I mean, the time difference is obvious. Okay, so if we know that, and this is an easy one to remember, in the Jewish counting of years, we're now 5, 7, 8, 5. Okay, so we know that what year Avraham was born. It's very easy to remember. 1948. Avraham's born in 1948. And then the Jewish people, they leave Egypt 2448. So they enter Israel 2488. So already, okay, 1948, 2448, 2488. And then, of course, we have 14 years of kibush v'chilik, and then we still have, and remember, in this section alone, there were 30 years of calm, there was 40 years of calm. It's a long time after, no question about it. But that we're going to fill in the blanks about the history of Avraham's life, what led to God picking him from a later story, that's fascinating. That's really, really fascinating. So look, we have a father and a son, where the father an inherent in practice, if not in total internal commitment to the idolatrous worship, and the son acting as opposition. The son destroys the idols. There's a short scene of an attempt to find out who exactly committed the vandalism. And the result that the son is identified, the son is in harm's way, and the story with a mocking comment directed at the idols. Okay, so the parallel is clear. So in other words, we thought of it even before we thought of it. It was quite obvious. So it still leaves our basic question unanswered. Why do we turn to this narrative to extract a scene and re-envision it in the life of Avraham? Like, why are we going forward to look backwards? They didn't choose to connect the youth of Moshe or David or Joseph in fashioning our portrait of Avraham. What connection did they see between Avraham and Gideon that led him down to this path? I believe that a careful and close reading of the Gideon narratives will illuminate the riddle and shed light on the exquisite intertextuality at the heart of the issue. So this is like, if you like words, if you like textual words, this is like you can't get enough of this. This is really good. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot. It's now page this is page 12 where it says 12, I think, right? Yeah. Oh, we're at now next one. Okay, 13. Okay. So the next, okay, we find a commonality in theme. Now we're going to look carefully at all the words of the episodes, and we've done this a number of times, and it's delicious when it happens, when it works. Now you have to have enough to like make sure that it really takes. If you have one word here, it's convenient, but not necessarily enough, unless perhaps it's the only time that word is used. As we touched on recently, the connection between the story of Lot and the Exodus, it's the only two times in the Chumash where the word lehismameya is used. The Jews couldn't leave because the Loech Hismameya, and it says Vayismama, the famous shalshelis that we have in Vayera, is the story of Lot. So that's the only two times. So there already, it's like, okay, that's like bang, bang, bang. It's like flashing. But here we have a number of things. We have the story, but now let's look at the text itself. So, number one, in contrast to all the other judges mentioned in the book, Gideon has direct revelation from God through a malach, an angel who comes and sits under a tree. Okay. Has anyone ever been greeted by a malach while sitting under a tree? Well, let's see. Of course, reminds us of Vayera. Avraham receives angels while he's sitting under a tree. He offers food to the angel. A kid later simply termed basar, efat, kemach, matzot, and marak, solid food of meat and bread coupled with a liquid. Of course, the wonderful meal that Avraham and Sarah offered, kemach, soles, lushi, asiugot, etc., etc. 3. After receiving the message that Hashem will be with him, he challenges and he says, and where are all of God's miracles? And subsequently, he asks, Bameh Oshia es Yisrael. Bameh, how will I deliver Israel? So this is going to automatically, when you see Bameh, it's the same that Avraham says to Hashem, Bameh Eda ki irashena, right? It's an exact replica in Genesis 15. Avraham challenges God's assertion. Hashem says, you're going to be the one. And you're going to be the one that's going to have all this progeny. You're going to have all this land. And Abraham scratches his head for a second. He says, wait a minute. How am I going to know that I will inherit it? I request asking God for some proof of reassurance to introduce with the word Bameh. It only appears in these two instances in the entire Tanakh. Okay? So the bond is getting tighter and tighter and tighter here until you reach a point you say, okay, I'm convinced now that they're connected. The question is now why? That's always we have to, and then we come up with a theory. There's no right or wrong necessarily. You have to kind of like come up with your own creative understanding. Number 4, at the close of the scene, Hashem promises, he says, Shalom lecha al tira. It will be peaceful for you, don't be afraid. This exact one used by Hashem in opening and closing the discussion with Avraham, because he says, Al tirak ki anochi imcha ve'ata tava el vasecha bishalom. Don't be afraid, I will go with you in peace to your grave. Again, similar text, etc. But none of these alone may necessarily have done it, but when you put them all together, it's certainly this. And you see, he quotes here an article from Rabbi Chaim Angel, an essay titled Gideon Avinu, comparing Gideon to Avraham. Also a very, very good essay. Okay, next. 5. At the end of our perek, after God gave Gideon a sign to prove his commitment, he asked for a second sign. And he says, Al yichar apacha bi va'adaber achapam anaseh na rak hapam. Don't be angry if he's like, let me just ask one more thing. I need one more sign. We found that puzzling at the end of the week. Like why does he keep asking? Okay. This unique formulation of terms is in a scene asking God for one more chance after a previous stage. It's the language when Avraham, he davens for Sodom. He says, Al na yichar la Adonai va'adaber achapam. Again, that achapam is the only time that it's used, it seems, in Tanakh, where he's asking God for something more, and he's saying maybe there's 10, maybe, there's 50, there's 45, there's 40, there's 30, et cetera, okay? Gideon is the only judge in the book who receives another name, Yeruval, in addition to his name given at birth. The unique feature, of course, dovetails nicely with the narrative arc of Abraham's life, as he receives a name change after he receives the covenant of circumcision. 7, Gideon and the Jewish people are faced with a major battle against a coalition of kings and nations from the surrounding areas in the land of Israel, including the forces of Midian, Amalek, and Bnei Kedem, nations from the east like Mesopotamia. As it unfolds, he's instructed to pare down his forces so that at the end he only has 300 soldiers that go to battle. We didn't get to that yet, but that's coming up next. Yes, it'll be exciting when we get to it. He has 300 soldiers. You say, wait a minute, 300 soldiers? He further divides his forces into 3 units, and they launch a strike under the cover of night. They're successful, and they defeat the coalition. Vayirdefu el Midian. That's 725 again. That's coming up still in the ensuing chapters. At the close of the battle, the reader discovers that part of the motivation of Gideon's ire and decision to go to war turns out to be that they had captured some of his half-brothers, Achai b'nei Imi, and had put them to death. So he had a personal motivation in this as well, that don't mess with my family. Okay? The entire narrative echoes the entirety of chapter 14 of the book of Genesis. This is a story that we don't spend a lot of time on. The war of the 4 kings and the 5 kings. And why does Avraham go to battle? Because who did they take? They took Lot, right? There's always even though, you're forced to take the brother-in-law into the business. I mean, what are you going to do? Because Zadie said you have to take him into the business. But, when he messes up, again, you still got to bail him out. You still got to fight for him, right? That's what happens, right? That's why, thank God, when I do, I don't have a family business. So a coalition of Mesopotamian kings come from the east, and they conquer both the east bank of the Jordan, land of Canaan, and the Canaan city-states. Among those are Lot and his family, Avraham's Achiv, right? Avraham gathers a small force of 318 soldiers who rout the coalition of kings, and Vayechalek, they separate, they chase down various enemy, Vayirdefaim, and this coalition represented by the king of Sodom, they come, they go, Emek Shaveh hu Emek HaMelech. At the same time, the king of Shalem, Jerusalem, also comes out and he blesses Avram, he gives him bread and wine. So it's understood by the rabbis and the Medrash and many modern teachers as if reflecting the desire of the Canaanite to literally crown Avraham king over all their territories, and that he refuses. But here are the similar battles, divide and conquer family members, etc. And at the conclusion of, again, at the end of Perek Chet, which we didn't get to yet, after we know that he has many wives and many children, he had also a concubine, a Pelegesh, with whom he fathered a son. And after that, in the information is presented, he dies, and he's described as having expired b'seiva tova. That's always a term that's used for tzaddikim, tikaver b'seiva tova, as we'll see here with Avraham. Similar scene was presented at the close of Avraham's life. Avraham, by the way, once Sarah Imenu dies in Chayei Sarah, he kind of disappears from the scene. The next thing we hear about him really is his death. Yes, he appoints Eliezer, but that's all by proxy. He's not really involved in that. He sends Eliezer, and that's it. And then it's 3 iterations of that story of Eliezer and Yitzchak. And then finally, Yitzchak comes back, and Avram, nothing, no conversation with God, no nothing. We just know that he marries Keturah, and he has a lot of children, and he dies, right? And many people say that Keturah was Hagar, which is an interesting study in and of itself. Okay. He has a lot of children with her, and then it speaks that Bnei Pilagshim, the children of the concubines, and then he dies b'seiva tova at a ripe old age. So in the entire Torah and prophets, the only 2 people it's describing as having died b'seiva tova are Avraham and Gideon. Okay, so I mean, like I'm good, like I have enough, but we want to put as many ingredients in this cake as possible. Okay, so finally, so in case that wasn't enough, It's fascinating to note that in the episode in which Gideon destroys the altar of his father, it chooses to report the seemingly insignificant detail that he took with him 10 men to do the job. Maybe they wanted to daven Marav. I don't know. Given all the other allusions to the Avraham narrative we have seen, it may be that the text here is once again playing off previous type scenes. Avraham famously argued that Sodom should be saved if at least 10 righteous people could be found in its midst. Unfortunately, they didn't have that. In contrast, in the city of Ophrah, there are at least 10 righteous people willing to aid Gideon. In Ophrah, there's a redeeming remnant that can ensure the future in the city and the future of the Israeli people at large. So that's a cute little addition. I think it's a nice little throw in, the 10 versus 10. Okay, so now what? So what do you make of it? It's good. It's neat. It's cool. I think that's the word to use. It's neat. You say that word to our kids, neat, and they'll laugh at us like we're from the 60s or something, from the 70s. Gee, Marsha, that's really neat. Okay. I'm so glad I've already understands that. See, I speak to my assistant rabbi and I say this. He's like no idea what I'm talking about. I mean, he's also not American. So, but he's not American. He's not. The problem is I look at myself as very young. I do. I think of myself as young. And when I let's say when his parents came, and I look at them as adults, and me is like then I realize like oh my God, we're the same age. Literally. I'm literally like he's my colleague, he's my partner in this, and his father's my age. I'm like, okay, but it's okay. I get over it. I still look at him that way. Anyway, so what do you any thoughts? Like what?
I mean, it makes sense, the parallels, but it doesn't answer the first question you asked, which is why did he choose her?
Right. And why we to go into this story forward to go backwards. So the Ramban there discusses and the Medrash is, because he's able to stand up for God. But if that didn't really happen, and the Medrash is sort of borrowing it from this story, but why? What is really? So we could say the connection. Well, the connection is that's the connection, right? We could.
So we're like that there was this incident based on the fact that both of them were selected without any
prior knowledge, like prior authorization, right? There's no, they didn't get approval from the insurance company, like they did prior. Okay, so let's see what Rabbi Helfgott has to say. Given the deep and rich connections between Gideon and Avraham narratives, we're now able to resolve the original dilemma described at the outset of the essay. It would appear that the rabbis of the Medrash, in their close reading of the text, recognized the fact that the text of Judges clearly presents Gideon in the image of Avraham. The language, the type scenes, the imagery, they're all meant to evoke in the reader the sense that this great hero is following the footsteps of his great ancestor, which we all sensed when we were learning this last week without going into the article, that kind of specific. We all sense that. We're like, oh yeah, this sounds familiar. Like as your your spidey senses should tingle when you read the story, like, oh yeah, like this is a very Abraham-esque. Okay. And so therefore, Gideon, in effect, is presented as an Abraham redux. That's the case. That's a great word. I believe the rabbis engaged in a simple piece of intertextual logic. If the text compares Gideon to Avraham, that means that there's an intimate connection between the two figures. And thus, if Avraham can teach us about Gideon, then in fact, Gideon can in turn teach us about Avraham, especially in areas where our text is silent. In a word, intertextuality is a two-way street where each narrative can and should shed light on the other. In this reading, the early life and youth of Avraham is illuminated by his later echo Gideon the judge, and thus Abraham the iconoclast is a derivative of Gideon the iconoclast, who himself is a derivative of Avraham the warrior, patriarch, and the man of Chesed. That's a great little exchange right there. In other words, it's not that we don't know anything about Avraham. Oh, let's look at Gideon. No, when we look at Gideon, we think of Avraham because of what he was able to do. Not forget the smashing of the idols part, all that, but at least just sort of this battling and fighting for your family and being appointed by God and being greeted by angels, this and that. Oh, that's all there already. And we're reminded of Avraham when we look at Gideon. And then, but when we look at intertextuality, you can go both ways. And then we could say, wait a minute. So if he's like him, so that means he's also like him. Don't you love the use of pronouns? If Gideon is like Avraham, if he's in the traces of Avraham, then Avraham can also perhaps be in the image or the traces of Gideon, and then we could use part of his life to explain the early part of Avram's career.
I think that's a little bit of a leap.
It absolutely is. By the way, That is exactly the point. Yes. This is what you're getting here. This is not, that's why I say there's no wrong answers. This is not science. This is not, the pasuk telling you, yeah, you have to go this way and learn this way and learn that way. No, we're developing a theory here based on an annoying question that we have, which is, wait a minute, we know this famous medrash about Avraham and it's mentioned in a few places, yet like we don't know anything about his early life. And where does the medrash get it
As a
from?
mother, this doesn't resonate with me because I see, people, kids like my husband or kids like each other, but not in just some ways, but not in another, a lot of,
I mean, it doesn't go both,
Yeah,
both
it
ways.
doesn't go both ways,
Okay.
no.
Yeah. I don't sometimes you could see it. You ever see a kid and they're like, yeah, there's an old man trapped inside of that kid. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Those kids usually, yeah. So I think it's, but we're not saying that, in other words, we're borrowing from the persona and the character and certainly the story to help fill in the blanks for what we don't know about Avraham, because a lot of what we do know about Gideon comes from what we do know about Avraham. I think that's the point. And it's just a fascinating thing to think about, because we're also not used to comparing totally disparate episodes in Tanakh and putting them in the same dish. We're not used to doing that. It's a fairly modern approach to things, which, by the way, it's not really modern because the Medrash has been doing it for hundreds and hundreds of years.
It's not because we have computers that can find these words that appear once.
No computers. This nothing to do with computers. No, you're doing computer this. No, no, not this.
They do discovery.
That's-
Who?
Who, Foreman?
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
Oh, the owl.
no, because first of all, these are not like, look, these are not complicated comparisons. When we were studying it last week, already we were evoked images of Avraham asking, the text, that's the same. If you study Tanakh, you don't need it. And so as I said, the Medrash, the Balaturim has been doing it. The Balaturim did it for his entire commentary on Chumash, and he didn't have a computer. I promise you that, because they didn't have computers then.
The word appears twice in the whole.
Yeah,
Right, so.
They had
so you-
concordances before computers.
yeah, they have a concordance.
Someone, even something Mikra,
Right, you just know,
They're going to know.
Right, what they say is that the rabbis, they were so familiar with the text, they just knew it
They
all.
do.
When I read
That's
something,
what-
and if I'm learning something and a word catches my attention, I'll automatically think of like where else it is found. And
So for sure, but then when you think, but it's nowhere else, like how.
well, you ask yourself, where else does it appear? And then you can figure it out.
Being that
I think for
knowledgeable.
people that really.
You
all
under,
those rabbis who make, all those people like, it's Gemara to, it's not that they know,
They know
they
it.
just
They just
know.
know the whole thing.
you underestimate the level of my intellect, I think. I think you're just insulting me. That's fine. It's okay.
But it is based on that they.
And I am that. So as you know, I have a steel trap of a mind for nonsense. I also have some room in there for some good stuff also. Like, so I happen to be like one thing, I'm not smart, but I can remember a lot of things. It happens to be it's one of the strengths I have is remembering things, but remembering like where something appears on a page, where a word appears in the Gemara, like you have it, like all these things, even from 40 years ago. I could tell, but I'm telling you, nobody uses computer because you first of all, they don't need to. If you know, you know it. Like, and then, but the Medrash has done this for years. Okay, all right, let's see. Despite what I believe is the direction in which to understand the development of this midrashic tradition, I concede that the midrashim themselves, whether in Bereshis Rabbah or any of their work, never make the explicit connection between the figure of Avraham and Gideon. The theory laid about it is one that has been arrived at by deduction and comparison, maybe computers. An explicit comparison in a rabbinic text fusing the two figures would, of course, strongly support the argument. Such a text has not yet been unearthed. So that's something also which we have to contend with, and that sometimes, again, that's what a medrash does. A medrash will often make that comparison for you, or just say, oh, this word only appears here and there, or it says hadahu. The language of the medrash is hadahu dichsiv. This is like it is written, and that's it. That's all the medrash say. And then it's up to you to figure out, okay, what's the context, what's the connection, etc. So then we have the ability to use the word lacuna, which we don't get to use quite so often, and it's not to be confused with one of those words from Gidget. Remember Gidget? The big kahuna. I mean, in this group, I could talk about Gidget, right? Mimi, I could talk about Gidget, right? You know Gidget.
כן, לא, אני לא יודעת.
Gidget, you probably even can't say it today because it's not appropriate. It was a contraction of girl midget.
Is that right?
Is
Yeah.
that true?
No, that's-
I-
think that's
Isn't that short?
She was short. I mean,
that short.
she was me, but like relative to everyone else. That's what that's actually good.
That's a good check.
Where's Rachel? I need his Snopes it out for me. Oh yeah. Here she goes. Here, wait, the Google Rebel. Here we go.
We're all gonna remember this comparison between
Right,
you
of all
and
the
I.
things
I'm
to
like,
take
well,
away.
you're saying, you know what I learned today?
Wait, countdown. Here it comes. The internet is working. Here we go.
I'm slow. Don't-
Oh.
Your source of so much information.
Say,
Nonsense.
hey Siri.
Anyway, this lacuna, but it was the big kahuna, leaves open the possibility that our reading of the genesis of this midrash may be incorrect. In fact, one might argue that ancient oral traditions about Avraham as iconoclast existed and were known. Thus, possibly the book of Judges shaped the textual presentation of the Gideon narrative in light of the oral traditions that they received by tradition about Avraham, the great hero and founder of the Jewish people. On the note, this possibility was raised to me by my esteemed teacher friend, Rabbi Carmi. I'll tell you why I love this. I love this because of the intellectual honesty and realizing that this is a theory. Still nothing? That this is a theory. Where does the name Gidget come from? So that to me, but I think it's a this is a great example of things you would never ever put together. Now, some things like when we studied Megillas Esther, it's almost Purim. We study Megillas Esther and the commonality and the thread that is
Okay,
woven.
I can't read what it says, but AI says the name Gidget is a portmanteau of the words girl and midget. I don't know what.
Thank you, AI. Yes. Yes.
I've heard it, but I don't know what it means.
It's a lacuna.
Yes, as we say every day, Lacuna Matata. Yeah. I don't- Great, super,
His biblical.
great.
Ugh.
Great.
So, but had we not read this article in context, it would be a little out there and hard to read, a little bit. Is the rest of his book equally as challenging or?
You- I don't know. You want to borrow it and look? Take a look. I trust you'll give it back. It's really good. He has phenomenal articles. I think you can go to the Wise Farm sale and get it. The this.
This would be a little hard to understand out of context, no?
Well, what do you mean? What do you consider out of? What do you mean?
Kind of know the stories.
Yeah,
So the
right,
reason
yeah.
I mentioned it last week was because when we learned it in class, I'm doing a different class on Mikvash, and it was like, oh my God, here's the story in the text.
Right.
But
Right.
you have to kind of.
Right. No. So that's the whole point. This whole derech halimud, what they call modern parshanut. Okay, modern parshanut very much follows this approach where you have a lot of intertextuality. Probably one of the first he mentions. He quotes in the article here from Rav Et Shalom, between the lines of the Bible. It's called, and he actually now just did the Magid series, the new book on Amos. He did that one. And like all those series, the white books, like all them, a lot of them rely on intertextuality, but not as, it's almost like gematria. It's like, I'm not going to base my faith on it, but it'll help me enhance my understanding of something.
It's a little bit better than either believing Moses really happened, which is certainly one option.
Right.
And they made it up out of nowhere. It's to explain like they didn't make it up out of nowhere.
Correct. But it's fascinating because what it does do is it forces you to read things that you wouldn't normally read, but then it forces you to read them side by side. Okay, I have many editions of Tanakh and Chumash, whatever. I have one that's very, very large like this, and it's just the text, no interpretation, whatever, because I needed just to look at the words, to look at this. And whenever I see patterns of words or series of words, and how they appear and where they appear, and you kind of color code them, and you look at them, and it's fascinating to look at because words are extremely important, right? So, let's take an example. So last week we read the Shira, Az Yashir. See, wait a minute, like where else does the word Az Yashir appear? So we have it in later on in Bamidbar, but we have other places of Shira, but it's not said like that. Can we look into what and why us in the future, like then, not like us shar, why yashir, like so these types of things when you pay attention to the words, or words that seem to be unusual or unusual, like for instance in Bereshis we have it at two, I think it's only 2 times, the word halazeh. Here comes that dreamer, bal hachalamot halazeh. Now you would say, here comes that one, you'd say hazeh or hazot. What's halazeh? Or the word, one thing I haven't really developed a good theory on it, but really fascinating iteration of the word me'uma. The word me'uma in Bereshis appears a lot of times. And usually they're clustered together. So sometimes you have to like use your you have to do this, like we have to do now at my age, right? Or sometimes we have to do this. You zoom out at the text and you look at a lot of like the bigger picture. And sometimes I'm looking at like, wait, let's take a story from Shoftim and a story from that's not even in the Chumash, but a story from Lech Lecha and Vayera. And like, okay, and we did this, like for instance, later on in Shoftim 19, the whole story Pelegesh Begiva, and we looked at that versus the story of Sodom. What happens with Lot and Sodom? Extremely similar stories with terrible, terrible results. Okay, and when we get there, we'll see that again. So it's an important way. It's hard to like. You gotta like wade in gently, because especially when you're so used to learning a certain way. Next story, done. Then okay, and then we're like, wait a minute, but let's look at something that's completely unrelated and see if there's any sort of similarities. And some connections are stronger than others, which sometimes we have a theory and we just that's what it is. It's a theory. Here, but what I love the intellectual honesty at the end. He's like, it would have been great, like what he's saying, it would have been great if we had just a medrash that would give us the two together. There's nothing in the classical literature that puts these two together. Not until 2010. Which is, by the way, also a great discovery in Torah. When you think about a Chiddush in Torah, to bring this to the world and say, hey, this is really wonderful. So people like Rabbi Helfgon and other great Tanakh scholars, this is what they do. And so I'm super excited. So every single year, they have right before Tisha B'Av in the Gush, they have something called Yimei Iyun B'Tanakh. They have a week-long series of shiurim. It's 3-4 days. Intense shiurim given by the best Tanakh teachers in Israel and from around the world also. And they also have like Tanakh hikes and this and that. So I think this year I might be able to go, which I'm super excited about. To like sit on a vacation, just sit and learn Tanakh with Amnon Bazak and with and Hebrew and English and this. And they have it, by the way, if you're interested, they have it online also. They do offer a track online. You can watch online. You can watch them afterwards, recordings, etc. Hebrew or English. Phenomenal, fantastic. But to sit and everybody sitting there with their tear-stained, worn Tanakh volumes, and then like the whole or now everybody has it on their iPads or whatever. But it's a very, very cool thing. So I couldn't. So I wasn't. I hadn't planned on doing this, but when Shelley reminded me and jogged my memory, and right after I said I remember where it was, and I sent you the article right away. Yeah, I sent it right away, and because I knew it was in the book, but like I said, I bet you it's online before I start photocopying and sending. Really, really interesting, and so this will help our understanding of our chapter and enhance our understanding, especially now as we go through Zion and Ches. So you'll look at it with that lens. So it's something different, but certainly I think worthwhile. So we have more of Gideon coming up, and remember, Pesach is in 2 months. Bye.
ביי, תודה רבה.